Well, a warm welcome to this talk, which reads rather like a fairly corny novel, but is in fact true, and it's well referenced, as you'll see when we go through. It's based on a New York Times article. "We were badly misled about events that changed our lives" is the title of the article. And we'll see that the implications are much wider than that. Last month in the New York Times. And it starts off really quite well. Since scientists began playing around with dangerous pathogens in laboratories, the world has experienced 4 or 5 pandemics. So leaky laboratories have been responsible for viral pandemics. I mean, that alone should be cause for significant pause, but we'll go on. 1977 Russian flu, for example. Now, this is in the good old days when we were allowed to call viruses after the name of the place that they originated, which we've done for, well, since viruses were discovered. But that wasn't allowed with the Wuhan virus, of course. Anyway, Russian flu, almost certainly a research mishap. And actually, the information for that is in this article here, which is actually a very good scientific paper that's quoted in the New York Times article. Scientists quickly suspected the odd 1997 Russian virus. There was things not right about it. And 2020, speculation about a laboratory accident broke out as well. And people were labelled in 2020 as cooks and cranks. Now, I didn't know what a cook was. It's an American term. It means mad, eccentric, picks fights to feel superior, fantastical stories, and insane. So anyone that believed in a lab leak was all of these things, according to feedback in 2020. Many public health officials, prominent scientists, all said conspiracy theory. This is a conspiracy theory. And this was from the leading journals at the time, journals I trusted all my working life, journals in 2020 I still trusted, now I don't. Medical leaders that in 2020 I still trusted, now I don't. Official government statements that in 2020 I trusted, now I don't. And I know a lot of you are in the same category who have been badly let down. Maybe the only good thing is we now perceive the nature of the deceptive reality that we are governed by more clearly. Maybe that's the good thing that's come out of this. Anyway, let's not rant, let's carry on. Now, for example, a non-profit EcoHealth Alliance lost a grant planning risky research into bat viruses at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which apparently may have had lax safety standards. So, okay, fair enough, but 77 Nobel laureates and 31 scientific societies lined up to defend EcoHealth Alliance, therefore there was consensus. So at the time, this appeared credible. Now, this is really concerning. 77 Nobel laureates. Does this mean that there's something about these Nobel laureates that are prepared to say things like this? I mean, we're not implying there's anything wrong with the Nobel Prize system. I simply don't know. But 77 Nobel laureates piling in to support a non-profit EcoHealth Alliance. Why would they do that? Is there some fundamental problem here in the way Nobel laureates are appointed that they would do that so willingly? 31 scientific societies. Again, who governs these societies? Who appointed these people? All these questions really flow out of this, that they were so willing to defend this. And at the time, up until 2021, I was pretty well taken in by them. Many of you weren't. People like Professor Dalgleish most certainly weren't. I wish I'd known him in 2020 so he could have clarified my thinking, but we move on. we progress. That's another good thing that's come from this. Contacts I've made with world leading authorities. It's been a real privilege. So there was consensus, apparently. Well, no, there was consensus. It was wrong. it was wrong. Hard to make this up. We have since learned, however, that to promote the appearance, not consensus, the appearance of consensus, some officials and scientists hid or understated crucial facts, misled at least one reporter. Well, I think for one you could probably change that to 1,000. Orchestrated campaigns of supposedly independent voices. So we had campaigns of supposedly independent voices. So if we take this paper, for example, here, this paper, Statement in Support of Scientists, Public Health Professionals and Medical Professionals of China combating COVID-19. Got a whole list of them. Looks like all these independent academics have just rallied round to the cause of truth. Again, now we are deeply disillusioned with established academia. With so many things. Anyway, let's carry on. So apparent consensus. Some officials and scientists hid or understated critical facts. I mean, just think about what this is saying. Officials and scientists hid critical facts. How dare they? Where's the accountability? And even compared notes about how to hide their communications in order to keep the public from hearing the whole story. You know, there's an old saying, I can't remember who it was now, but someone said a profession is a conspiracy against the rest of us. Shouldn't be like that. But this was a conspiracy against us common scum, us plebs, us proletariat, who don't really need to know. All we need to do is obey. Don't need to think. We'll just take the information that's handed down by our betters. These elite people on high that are just treat us like mushrooms. Keep us in the dark. Anyway, this is an example from the Daily Telegraph. Mr. Donald McNeil Jr., who was a writer for the New York Times at the time, said their efforts to throw him off track influenced the newspaper's coverage of the theory and likely contributed to the topic being dropped for a year. And when they're talking about the paper here, this is the New York Times, although this is reported in the Telegraph. So, efforts to throw him off track. So, deliberate efforts to throw journalists off track. The few journalists that were prepared to question the narrative at the time. And I remember at the time saying, where the heck are all the investigative journalists on quite a few stories? Well, at least one of them there was being misled. And I think, as we say, we can probably put 3 noughts on the end of that. Right. Wuhan laboratory research details now emerged. Safety precautions might have been terrifyingly laxed. Now, you've got to admire the New York Times almost English understatement here. Safety precautions might have been. I don't think there's much might about it, do you? I think we could have been a slightly bolder here, given it's the New York Times, but there we go. Might have been terrifyingly relaxed. So they might have been terrifyingly relaxed. Terrifyingly laxed. Might terrifyingly. The sort of two don't quite seem to go together there. Right, is this just history now? Should we just move on? Live and let live. C'est la vie. If anyone needs convincing that the next pandemic is only an accident away, check out Cell. Now, Cell is a journal, peer-reviewed journal here. I'm not going to go into this article in detail, but just to summarise, researchers, past and present, from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, describe taking samples of viruses found in bats, ring a bell, and experimenting to see if they could infect human cells, ring a bell, gain-of-function research, ring a bell, and pose a pandemic risk. Well, aren't we grateful that scientists from the Wuhan Institute of Virology are still looking for viruses that could save us from a future pandemic? It begs credulity that this is still going on. Now, the safety level at the lab here is described as basic laboratory, biological laboratory safety 2. Whereas it should be 4, of course, for this kind of research. Way, way higher. In fact, they describe it as 2 plus, whatever that means. One authority quoted in the New York Times, insufficient for work with potentially dangerous respiratory viruses. Yes. So this work that's still being done, apparently, to save us all from the next pandemic, could easily cause the next pandemic any time. It's laughable. You know, they're saying they're trying to save us from a pandemic when they've just caused one. And now they're doing exactly the same thing to save us from the next pandemic. And your role is to be grateful. You little person out there. Be grateful to your scientific betters. Right, you'd think, according to the New York Times, you'd think by now we'd have learnt it's not a good idea to test, and I rather like this analogy, possible gas leaks with a lighted match. So you've got gas coming out and it burns, so you put a match to it and see if it lights. Of course, it might blow you up. Would it blow you up? That's what's going on now. Still matters. Lessons have not been learnt, it would appear. And you'd hope that prestigious scientific journals would have learnt not to reward such risky research by publishing it. Why haven't we learnt our lesson? Well, if we admitted it's risky now, it must have always been risky. So if people in authority or mainstream media said, just a minute, this is a bit risky, isn't it? Then someone could say, well, yeah, but wasn't it risky in 2020? Wasn't it risky in 2019? And all this time this research was going on when you kept stum about it. Maybe that's why it is. Who can possibly know? This is just speculation, of course. And perhaps we were misled on purpose. Perhaps, again, understatement, perhaps, by the New York Times. So when the New York Times says perhaps we were misled, perhaps this is understatement. When Wuhan experienced an outbreak of a novel coronavirus related to ones found in bats, and researchers soon noticed the pathogen had the same rare genetic features that the Eco Health Alliance and the Wuhan researchers had proposed inserting into bat coronaviruses. Don't take my word for it, there's the reference. You would think the Eco Health Alliance would sound the alarm. So we've got the same virus now, because the genome was published quite early on, once the Chinese Wuhan Institute of Virology was rumbled. You would think that Eco Health Alliance would say, just a minute, heck, just a minute. This is just like the paper we proposed. What did they say? Did they say anything? You would think the Eco Health Alliance would sound the alarm far and wide. It did not. And this is the sickening thing about this, really quite sickening. It's only through freedom of information and requests and things that we don't know anything. Otherwise, we'd know diddly squat about this, I'm sure. Were it not for public records requests, leaks and subpoenas, the world might never have learnt about the troubling similarities between what could easily have been going on inside the lab, that's the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and what was spreading through the city. So only because people have done freedom of information requests, subpoenas and leaks, and don't take my word for it, check out the references. So that brings us on to this paper. Now, this screen I'm showing you now, believe it or not, is live from the internet. This paper has not been retracted. Incredible, this paper has not been retracted. So you can go to the paper, you can see who the lead author is there, for example. That's Christian G. Anderson. At that time, I don't know if he still is, Department of Immunology and Microbiology. California. La Jolla, California. Anyway, this paper has not been retracted. Let's look at something about what this paper says. Now, the proximal origin of SARS coronavirus 2 is the paper. Nature Medicine, you know, I had assumed in 2020 that Nature Medicine was up there with the Lancet, the New England Journal of Medicine, Journal of the American Medical Society, Association, JAMA. And Nature Medicine hasn't retracted this paper. Complete loss of faith. I've got complete loss of faith. I think they've lost faith, but I've lost faith in these journals. And that is incredibly important, because these journals were axiomatic. If it was in a journal of this caliber, you believed it reflected the current state of knowledge. Now, what are we supposed to base our medical decision making on, for example? Becomes rather tricky, doesn't it? Anyway, that was in there. They said this: we do not believe that any type of laboratory-based scenario is plausible. Don't you indeed? But, wait a minute. But we later learned through congressional subpoenas of their Slack conversations, which is kind of like a WhatsApp thing, I think. Don't use it myself, but it's a communication platform. That while the scientists publicly said the scenario was implausible, privately many of its authors considered the scenario to be not just plausible, but likely. So they said one thing in the paper, and they were saying something else privately. Imagine that. Dear me. Don't take my word for it. There's the references. Right. Even evolutionary biologist Christian Anderson, the lead author, Slack message. So remember, it said, we do not believe that any type of laboratory-based scenario is plausible. That's what that said. But then in a Slack message, you said this: the LabEscape version of this is so frigging likely to have happened because they were already doing this type of work and the molecular data is fully consistent with that scenario. The LabEscape version, if this is so frigging likely in private, publicly, we do not believe that any type of laboratory-based scenario is plausible. I don't see those two statements as being reconcilable, do you? Jeremy Farrar, now chief scientist at the World Health Organization. In his book, Farrar reveals he acquired a burner phone. No. I told you it was like a novel, but this is terrible. This is true. A burner phone. Now, I only knew about burner phones from TV. Not that I watch many these days, but in the past I have watched TV dramas about criminals, cops and robbers, bad guys. The bad guys have burner phones. In novels, in TV dramas, of course. I'm not saying that's true in this situation by any means. But burner phones, I checked. Anyway, this guy, now chief scientist at the World Health Organization, he acquired a burner phone. Now, I checked on this techie site here. Burner phones are prepaid phones purchased with cash for privacy reasons, often associated with avoiding authorities. What was he? Oh, no, that's right, World Health Organization now. But this phone was to avoid authorities. Right, and arrange meetings with them, the proximal origin authors, with high-ranking officials including Francis Collins, then director of the National Institutes of Health, and a certain Dr. Anthony Fauci. Documents obtained through public record requests, again not released voluntarily, by non-profit US Right to Know, sounds like a great organisation, I'll have to check them out more, US Right to Know, show that the scientists ultimately decided to move ahead with a paper on this topic, operating behind the scenes. Farrer reviewed their draft and suggested that the authors that they rule out the lab leak even more directly. So say it's absolutely not a lab leak, and they complied with this. So remember, that was what they said in the paper. We do not believe any type of lab leak. Base scenario is plausible, but the lab escape version of this is so frigging likely to have happened in private. Right, let's carry on. I'm sorry this video is taking a long time, but I think it's quite interesting. They complied. Anderson, that's the lead author from this paper here, remember, because it gets a bit confusing. That's Christian Anderson here, this guy. Anderson later testified to Congress that he had simply become convinced that a lab leak, while theoretically possible, was not plausible. In his private messages said, the lab escape version of this is so frigging likely to have happened because they were already doing the same type of work, and the molecular data is fully consistent with that scenario. The message, but to Congress, not less convinced. Probably changed his mind by then, which of course people have the right to do. Later chat logs obtained by Congress show the paper's lead author discussing how to mislead. So he was trying to mislead this reporter, Donald G. McNeil Jr., as to throw him off track about the plausibility of a lab leak. How can the chief author of a scientific paper be deliberately seeking to mislead journalists and thereby public opinion? Why would they want to do that? Surely science is about truth, about discovering the nature of reality. Or am I just naive for thinking that? No, I still believe that. I don't have a problem with science. It's scientists I have a problem with now. Reference. Right. And then this other paper here by a group of independent scientists. Really? We could go through them all, we won't. But they're all there. The links are there if you want to look at this for yourself. So this was this paper here, statement in support. We're now looking at. Right. This was in the Lancet. Again, the Lancet, I mean, it's impossible to say how venerated, you know, next to Holy Scripture, if it was in a scientific journal, that was it. Not anymore. Not anymore. Not in my mind. Once bitten, twice shy. It's more than that. You realise how papers are selected. A little bit more about what's published, what's not published. Who pays for what's published. He who pays the fiddler calls the tune. We could go on, but we won't for now. Right, Lancet. The once venerated Lancet said this: conspiracy theories do nothing but create fear. No, they create light, actually, but never mind. Rumours and prejudice. Prejudice? Almost hinting at racism, I don't know. That jeopardise our global collaboration in this fight against the virus. So they seem to be saying that the fight against the virus can be optimised if we base our thinking on lies. I don't think that's true. The Lancet article goes on. We support the call from the Director General of the WHO. That's the former Ethiopian politician who was and is Director General of the WHO, to promote scientific evidence and unity over misinformation and conjecture. So these authors agree with the Director General of the WHO, all independently, apparently. Right. The letter appeared to be the work of a group of independent scientists. It was anything but. And just because it gets a bit confusing, we're talking about this letter now here, published in Lancet. Thanks again to public document requests by the US Right to Know. Well done, US Right to Know. Sounds like you're doing some great work. Thank you. Check out the reference. The public later learned that behind the scenes, Peter Daszak, EcoHealth Alliance president, had drafted and circulated the letter while strategizing on how to hide his tracks and telling the signatories that it will not be identifiable as coming from any one organisation or person. So it looks like they seem to be saying here that Peter Daszak, president of EcoHealth Alliance, actually wrote this. And somehow got all these people to sign. Probably a few embarrassed faces around at the moment. Right. Had drafted and circulated the letter while strategizing on how to hide his tracks. Not me, mate. And telling the signatures that they won't be identified. The Lancet later published an addendum disclosing Daszak's conflict of interest as a collaborator of the Wuhan lab, but the journal did not retract the letter. So again, let me stress, this is live on the internet now. It's still there. Hasn't been taken down. Still there. Other papers have been taken down on maybe repurposed drugs, for example, almost as if there's financial reasons for doing so. Of course, we couldn't possibly comment. And they had assistance. Thanks to more public record requests and congressional subpoenas. There's no voluntary confession here and repentance, is there? Check out the link for yourself. The public learnt that David Moran's, a senior scientific advisor to Fauci at the National Institutes of Health, wrote to Daszak, Peter Daszak, that he had learnt how to make emails disappear. There's the reference. Especially emails about pandemic origins. We're all smart enough to know. This is David Moran speaking, Dr. Fauci's man. We're all smart enough to know to never have smoking guns. And if we did, we wouldn't put them in emails. And if we found them, we'd delete them. Make them disappear. I hope that was coherent. That was as coherent as I could make it. Just to finish off, New York Times commented. Now, the New York Times did put in some what I consider pseudo justification. I'm not going to go through that because I didn't really agree with it. But if you read the whole article, it is. New York Times is paywalled normally, but they do seem to make this article publicly available, which of course is commendable. But they did say, but a clumsy, misguided effort like this didn't just fail, it backfired. Yep. Only an honest conversation will lead us forward. Yep, and I believe that's always been true. I mean, just look at where we are now. CIA, Department of Energy, which runs... Department of Energy's got loads of really high-tech labs all over the place in the States, and I don't know, maybe other countries. They think lab leak origin is likely. German Federal Intelligence Service is 2020. 80 to 95% probability it's a lab leak. But of course, we weren't told this. I only found that out about a week ago. Why weren't the German public told? They're paying for these intelligence services. Told you it was a bit like a novel. Hope that's coherent. I'll paste as much as that in the comments below as the algorithm, as not the algorithm, as the comment, not the comments, the description. Get there in a minute. The YouTube description now. There's a word limit on the description for YouTube, so I'll put in what I can. But it's there. Read it for yourself. Couldn't make it up. Yet we've provided the evidence. And if you think about what was done on the basis of flawed information, deliberate disinformation, misinformation, lies, deceit, what was done in the name of lies and deceit, it is why has opened many of our eyes to the question marks surrounding those in leadership in many fields. Complete breakdown of trust. What do we do about this? Well, I think at many levels, in many organisations, we need significant change. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. Bless you all.